Let's see if I can do that again. Hey, Zane. How y'all doing?
Yeah, or you can push that forward. That would be too easy.
Zane, you're. This is probably one of the better programs I've given.
Are you gonna put me in the video no matter what? Trying to avoid getting in the video.
It's just,
Zane, at least you're on the video.
makes it really hard to hear. Oh, man, why did I do that?
I was trying to have the things on. Here.
I think those should.
Trying to change out, not these.
I'd like to call to order the August 12th, 2021 meeting of the James Island County Planning Commission. This meeting has been noticed in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information. Those that will join me in prayer and pledge allegiance to the flag. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to gather here tonight. We pray that this meeting is successful and productive. Please guide us during our discussions, give us wisdom concerning the issues we may face. We pray for the ability to work together in harmony for the welfare of the citizens, land, natural resources of the town of James Island. In your most blessed name, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My name is Bill Lyon. I'm the chairman of the Planning Commission. Ed Steers, next to me, is the vice chair. Zinni Quinn is the commissioner. And Mark Mayer is our newest commissioner. Deborah Bidwell is absent today. And I think Francis Simmons is also absent. Kristen Crane is our planning director. Flannery Wood is planning director too. Ashley Callahan is
She runs it all.
she runs it. And Bo is our attorney. Let's see. I have a motion to approve the minutes for the June 10th, 2021 meeting?
I so make a motion. We go to minutes.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? At this time, we'd like to encourage anyone who would like to speak regarding the topics of the meeting or any other planning related topic. Please come forward when your name is called. Speak.
Okay, I'm speaking on behalf of the James Island members of the Charleston Coalition for Wildlife Safety Standards. Yes, my name is Karen Beard, and I live at 537 Whitechapel Circle here on James Island. I'm speaking on behalf of the James Island members of the Charleston Coalition for Wildlife Safety Standards. In your packet tonight, you received a letter from Dr. Yusuf Salibi. Dr. Salibi is a licensed physician in Mount Pleasant, and he urged you to pay close attention to the information given to you by our crew. The information he referred to was provided to you in June, and it is a list of non-industry paid independent studies showing biological harm from non-ionizing radiation. It is a list of what other cities are doing, and it also contains a list of reasons to deny small cell applications for other things other than health concerns. We asked in June that you present this information to the legal department, asking them to thoroughly follow up to see what can be done to protect residents of James Island, especially children. And we sincerely hope that you have read our material and that you have researched beyond it. We have no additional information for you tonight. Our goal was to give you information you would not receive from industry-related individuals, and that's what we have done. The studies that we have given you show the safety of non-ionizing radiation is in dispute, and that there is much more research required before we can let our children be in close proximity to it. The wireless industry has gone to great lengths and expense to market the risk of non-ionizing radiation as insignificant. Their wealth filters into most agencies charged with making health decisions for citizens, and so their efforts have been successful. But the fact is, despite the millions of dollars the industry has poured into their research, their own research, non-industry paid independent scientists are getting different results in their testing. As long as there is any question as to the safety of antennas placed in close proximity to our children, whether at home or at school, the Charleston Coalition for Wildlife Safety Standards will take a strong stand for the precautionary principle. Our platform is no speed of internet for any reason is worth risking the health of even one child. But there is a safe way to deliver ultra-high-speed internet and cybersecurity to homes on James Island. AT&T has already begun to bury fiber optic cables in my neighborhood from Root Point. These cables will connect homes to faster speeds and more cybersecurity that can be achieved with wireless. We are asking you tonight, the Charleston Coalition for Wildlife Safety Standards is asking you tonight to research the possibility, really research the possibility of fiber optics to each home in the neighborhoods of James Island. Thank you for your time and your effort in making these decisions, and we know full well that it is not easy. Thank you.
So at the last planning commission meeting, you guys asked staff to try to find somebody who could speak on 5G in general, and Commissioner Bidwell found someone and interviewed him via Zoom a couple of weeks ago, and so we're just going to listen to that right now. It's kind of loud when it comes up.
Did it come to you that we're recording, Chris?
It did.
Awesome. Hey, Chris, would you mind just introducing yourself with your full name and your I don't know, whatever job title you'd like to give yourself today.
So Chris Gauthier, I have a bachelor's degree in biology and master's in biomimicry. I've worked, I've spent 15 years in the military. I've spent 6-7 years in other government organizations. And I've also worked as a consultant in strategy, business model, and AI and automation, and done some work with sensors and AI and 5G. And then I also consult for a nonprofit in Granada, Spain.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. So we're recording this for our upcoming James Island Town Planning Commission meeting. And we've been tasked with developing our 5G ordinance for the town. Now there's lots that precede our ability to really change much beyond the aesthetics and we're kind of hemmed in to some degree, but we are dealing with lots of other questions. And as a biologist and environmentalist myself, I also understand there's so much misinformation out there. So we really appreciate your expertise. And I'm just going to ask you a few questions. If you could help us understand a bit more about some of the facts and myths and about 5G today, that'd be great.
Absolutely, look forward to it.
Awesome. Maybe we can start with like, what's the difference between 5G and 4G and what makes 5G better than 4G?
So I think it's important right off the bat to kind of distinguish between two elements of 5G. So the one that most people are familiar with is this idea of 5G using new bandwidth, new higher frequency bandwidth, which is true. And they're also, so there's 3 elements of that piece as well. So you've got 2 big elements. You've got the bandwidth increase, but 5G is also using new technologies on the back end that we don't have to go into today, all about how the data is parsed and used and packaged and all that stuff. And that's also part of the reason why it's an improvement. So you've got these 2 elements that need to be talked about, and put together, what they do is they allow for much higher bandwidth, much higher downport. For the average person, basically, it's like going from your 4G on your phone right now. You might watch YouTube, or if you try to stream something on Netflix, it might pop. And then you go home, you get on your home Wi-Fi. It's like so much faster. That's the difference. It's like going from your current cell network to your home Wi-Fi. And so we'd be looking at going from 4G to 5G, significant increases in your speed, your data speeds, not just on your phone. There's a number of applications, but that would be the most obvious one for the average user.
Okay, thanks. So could you tell us a little bit about this, the wavelength frequency and safety aspects or energy aspects about the way that 5G is delivered? I know that there's a couple of different possible ways to deliver 5G, and maybe as we talk a little bit about that relationship between wavelength and energy and how we're endangered, you can also probably tie that into why these new 5G towers need to be so much closer together than the older 4G towers, which could be miles apart.
Yeah. So I should probably say right off the bat, I appreciate healthy science. As a scientist, I think that is the heart of science. And it's a lack of healthy skepticism that got solidified back in the 50s and got us quite mistaken in the 2000s, right? And it's interesting too when you look at the different approval regimes when it comes to a new drug, like through the FDA, the company has to prove that it's safe and effective. They actually have to prove that. And so it takes a long time. Whereas something like, something you spray on your lawn and your kids roll around in it, the company just has to show that we think it's okay. So there's these different things. And so I appreciate the fact that folks are skeptical and they want to hear about it. And so there has been a huge amount of research done, universities, companies, governments, probably one of the most comprehensive assessments of the whole electromagnetic spectrum is done by a group called the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation actually, ICNIR. And I can share that with you, a link to the report. They look at the entire electromagnetic spectrum using, and then they specifically looked at different wavelengths and the dangers or lack thereof associated with each one. So we've got an electromagnetic spectrum, and this is basically, you can also sometimes refer to as electromagnetic radiation, which then invokes, figures of nukes and things like this. Basically, radiation is any time energy is released. I am radiating energy right now in the form of body. I'm radiating energy in my voice. It's causing molecules of air to bounce and move. And so I'm radiating energy. So we have this electromagnetic spectrum, and it goes all the way from one end, very long wavelengths of energy, all the way to on the very other end, we've got the very short, very short. That's gamma radiation, things like this, very. And what's interesting is right about the middle is visible light. So visible light is a form of radiation. So it's light coming from the sun. When we turn on our lights in the evening, our telephones, our screens, the glow sticks when we go to parties, all of that is visible light, and it sits right in the middle of this spectrum. And so everything, well, a large chunk of this stuff on the really short, high energy side of the spectrum, so up there with gamma rays, that's what they call ionizing radiation. And one reason why they call it that, basically that's the really nasty stuff. That's X-rays and that's gamma, and that's the stuff that will just give you kills, right? Turn you to the hall, right? And then you get to visible light, and then you get to this other end with somewhat, scientists are really bad at naming things. And so you've got gamma rays up here, but ultra high frequency and very high frequency are actually down here, way away from the really nasty stuff. So you've got these names that are very confusing because you think you hear ultra high, VHF, very high, super high.
And microwaves, right, which aren't even micro.
Right, microwave, right. Compared to the nano side, it's very confusing. So what I like to do is anchor folks in that middle part with visible light. So visible light sits here in the middle, and everything else below that is effectively lower frequencies than visible light. So to give us a good understanding of that, the energy frequencies that we're talking about in 5G are about 17,000 times lower than visible light. So what that means is every time you turn on a light bulb, even an old incandescent one, even an LED, those thing around, you turn on an incandescent light bulb, you light a match, you start a fire in your backyard, the fire pit, you're releasing 17,000 times more higher frequency energy than your 5G cell phone would. So just as that puts it on that spectrum, so it gives you a reference point. The other piece of that obviously is, you mentioned microwaves, right? Right there, that whole microwave is dangerous, right? Because, right, you can't put your head in the microwave and turn it on, it's a bad day, right? But there's a combination between, and we know this, right? We at home, we might have this really nice microwave that's 1,700 watts or whatever. And then we go to this hotel for the weekend and it's got this tiny little microwave that you barely fit a burrito in. And for some reason, it takes, 7 years for it to cook that little frozen burrito. And then you look on the side and it's like 400 watts or whatever. So it's almost like, and this isn't a one-for-one analogy, but I'm going to use it a little bit. Think about water, right? If I have a gallon of water and I've got this giant opening and I pour it slowly, no big deal. I take that same gallon of water and I put it in a high pressure washer, really powerful pressure washer, and it can go right through skin. Same water, same amount, just the amount of energy I'm using to kind of push it out. So it's not a one-for-one analogy, but think about that microwave the same way. You have microwaves And the more oomph I put behind those microwaves, the quicker I cook that burrito.
Great.
And so if I put, and again, we're talking, with the microwave, at home, the appliance, we're talking hundreds or thousands of watts. With your average cell phone, you're talking, less than a watt. So tiny amounts of energy. So you have tiny amounts of energy in these confusing sounding wavelengths, ultra high and all this good stuff, being broadcast. And our digital signals are piggybacking on those waves, and they go from point to point. That's generally kind of a quick snapshot of the spectrum without having wonderful graphs and things in front of me.
That's great. That's super helpful. So where would 5G fit in that millimeter range on our spectrum? And what about the power that 5G is going to be blasted out at urban and rural and suburban settings? Yeah,
this is a great question because the answer is it depends. So many things, right?
Right.
The important thing here is that 5G is actually 3 different groups of wavelengths. So you've got low band, medium band, and high band. And low band and medium band are wavelengths that we're already using today. These are the 3G, 4G wavelengths. And this is what I was saying earlier. What we've been able to do is we've been able to evolve other technologies so we can use those same wavelengths, but use them better. And we can put more data across them and do different things with it.
Right.
And so those are 2 of the bands. The third band, so to give a reference point, so you're talking about 600 in terms of hertz, 600 hertz up to about 3 gigahertz in the low and medium band. And those numbers should be interesting to folks. If you're at home right now and you have a wireless router, it might be, you'll see this, 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. Those are the same things. Those are the same kinds of band wavelengths we're talking about. So your home router right now is putting out wavelengths in your home of 2.4 and or 5 gigahertz. And so we're already around this kind of energy. It's here, it's around us. The high band on 5G starts at about 6 gigahertz and can go up to over 100 gigahertz.
Okay.
Those have not been deployed widely yet. So you might be on your phone and it might say 5G, but you might be looking at the low and medium band. Those high bands, because of their higher frequency, they can carry more data, they have a little bit more energy. And so that's when you're really going to start seeing the crazy speed differences. The downside of that, and you alluded to this earlier, the downside of that is the higher the frequency, the harder it is to go through things. So walls, clothing, skin, even rain, heavy rain can affect some of these signals. And that also means they go shorter distance because, while we don't necessarily see it, there's things in the air from other gases and to pollution, to particles and dust, and the higher frequencies don't travel as far.
So the higher frequency part of 5G means that's why the towers have to be closer together, because the waves can't travel as far, can't move through buildings or trees.
That's correct.
Is that what this line of sight thing is that folks are reading about with 5G?
Yeah, and so you've got to put the towers close together because of that. And part of the line of sight is that, but also interestingly enough, part of the line of sight is related to the other side, which is the new technology. And that is, with some of the newer towers, what 4G and 3G does right now is almost like your Wi-Fi router at home, just blasts out a signal, carrier signal, and your phone can communicate with that. One of the ways to optimize the use of these wavelengths, these frequencies, is to actually get the tower to be able to directly talk, almost directly to your phone, rather than just blasting out a general signal that your phone kind of piggybacks on. the tower finds you and targets your aims at your phone. And the reason why this is important, so this is kind of the part of 5G piece that no one's talking about, which is also why there's so many new antennas. We know that I'm old enough, right, that I used to listen to AM and FM radios in the car before the satellite radio and the stream radio and everything else, right? So I would turn on my favorite radio station and you drive, and then you would go get it, and then you do a new city. And you go from listening to rock country, because in this new city, that station was country, and you couldn't, they actually had to deconflict the broadcast of those signals, because otherwise they step on each other.
Right.
So what you can do with these shorter range frequencies is, let's just pick a frequency of 6 gigahertz. I can be on a 6 gigahertz signal, and you can be on a 6 gigahertz signal in the same town, even maybe on the same, mile-long stretch of road. But if I'm on one end and you're on one end, and we're talking different towers, then we get to use the same frequency, but we don't step on each other because we're talking different towers with that. You've got shorter distances because of the.
So it's more efficient.
Exactly. So you're using the same frequencies that you're currently using, and you're using some new ones, and you can figure out how to like double, triple, quadruple, et cetera, use those frequencies. And they can target go direct to your phone rather than just spreading out a wide signal. So all of these combined allow faster data release.
Excellent. So, are there risks associated with health risks for humans or pets or animals when these targeted higher energy waves or higher frequency and more powerful waves are coming at our cellular devices? Are they also bombarding our body, or is it targeting just our cellular devices? And what about our cellular devices or our wireless devices or our Internet of Things in the future where everything has a chip in it? Does the radiation that say my smart coffee mug in the future is giving off in order to get the signal from the 5G tower, is that going to hurt me too? Some of the public questions that we're getting are, they're concerned about children, developing brains, about pets, about what's our minimum safe distance, and there's a lot of confusing information out there in this era of too much information, perhaps, that we have to sit through with very high skepticism. So if you can help us understand a bit more, maybe a synopsis of safety regarding this new 5G tech, that'd be super helpful.
Sure, absolutely. And again, the skepticism is good, and it's great to ask these questions, because then we don't get the legacy of the world, right? At the same time, the data starts coming in, and there is a lot of really good, reliable data out there on these. So first off, the mid and low band frequencies we're already dealing with today, what we've been dealing with for 20 years.
Right.
And when we look at what they call longitudinal studies, so these are studies done over a long period of time. Just a quick divergence. A lot of studies are done in science, but they're for a relatively short period of time. 6 months, 3 months, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. Longitudinal studies take a 5, 10, 20, even longer view. So since the rollout of 3G and 4G in the early 2000s, studies started going on, these longitudinal studies, especially in Northern Europe. And what they found is no correlation between 4G, 3G, cell phone use, and other related technologies, and cancer, brain cancer, leukemias, autism, all of these things that are often associated with these technologies. They actually haven't found a connection between them. Other studies have been done in the US, experimental studies have been done. At my alma mater, University of Illinois, they took, now this was with power lines, not with 5G, but they literally had pigs living under high voltage, like 3 feet underneath high voltage power line for years on end, and no correlation between the occurrence of disease such as cancer and so forth, and those problems. And similar studies have been done with animal models. The closest one that I've seen is where they subjected rats to 9 hours a day of exposure at levels of almost 100 times the recommended levels by the FDA and others. And there was a slight increase in cancer in some of the rats, but those cancers that got the rats that got the cancer actually lived longer than the other rats. So
That's great. Now, the rat study that you're mentioning, is that with our 3 and 4G?
yes, that was the
Longitudinal rats. Okay,
So they did a
I read that. Yeah.
yeah. Basically, what they've come up with is there's no link between these frequencies and usage of these frequencies in cancer, leukemias, autism, nausea, vomiting, all of this stuff. Now, one of the reasons for that is the fact that these are relatively low power. The frequencies themselves are incredibly low compared to visible light. And then they're relatively low power, less than a watt coming off your handset, and the towers are in the single watt range in terms of the amount of energy that we're putting out. And because of that, you need the combination, almost like with the water analogy, you need a combination of those two in order to get to the danger zone, and you don't have that. The other advantage is, and you see this more in urban areas, like in cities, they'll sometimes have the towers on the sides of buildings. And what they do there is, what's interesting is, if this is the side of the building, the tower or the antenna will be here, basically pointing out away from the building. So you might have your office right on the other side of the wall, but the energy is not being directed in, it's being directed out. And again, with 5G, brick, drywall, concrete, leather would actually currently kind of block those, would block those signals.
Okay.
So.
Now, what about the studies with 5G? We don't have longitudinal studies because it hasn't been around long enough, but what about the short-term studies? Are there,
Correct.
are there any dangers that are more significant with 5G than what we saw with 3 and 4G?
The answer is not so far. And there's more to that. So there haven't been any studies that have shown that there's potential. The other nice thing is that, unlike, there are all sorts of crazy new things out there, graphene, carbon nanotubes, and we're discovering things all the time in biology where we're like, holy cow, how does that work? We just don't know how it works. The electromagnetic spectrum we've known about since Isaac Newton, right? Playing with the spectrum, the prism and all that good stuff. We know a lot about the electromagnetic spectrum, and we know how it affects biological tissues. And so we do the studies anyway, just to show and reinforce what we know. But we can say, oh, at this temperature, or this, this frequency and this energy level, this would be the result. And then we can show that in a laboratory experiment and show that our calculations.
So it's predictable.
Exactly, it's very predictable. And there are organizations in the United States, the FCC, the FDA, internationally, the organization I mentioned earlier, are all looking at this. So, what is the biggest concern with 5G? The answer is, if you stand close enough, and if the tower has enough power going through it, you could get warm. So they've done some experiments and they've shown that at 6 gigahertz and 18 kilowatts, you can heat the human body 1 degree Celsius.
So how much it burn you?
Correct, just make you warm. So in other words, take your jacket off. But the interesting thing about that is that 6 gigahertz and 18 kilowatts. Most of these towers are in the, so a kilowatt, 1 kilowatt is 1,000 watts.
Right.
Most of these towers are under 4 kilowatts.
But now the high frequency goes up to 100 gigahertz. right? Are the 5G, like, is 6 gigahertz a typical frequency, or are they more likely to be higher frequencies?
Right now, it's typically 6 gigahertz and less.
Okay,
And higher frequencies they're looking at the higher frequencies for more dense urban areas.
okay.
So think about it.
Or could use them with their devices.
Exactly. So think about it like a college campus maybe, where you've got a large, I went to the University of Illinois, where there's 40,000 students, every single one of them's on at least one device, not two, an iPad and a phone. You want more bandwidth in those kinds of areas.
Okay, so the higher frequency in the urban areas is to provide bandwidth to more densely populated area. Our town, the town of James Island is suburban, or rural. And so we would likely be in the 6 gigahertz range rather than the 100.
Yeah, but again, even then, they can do the calculations and they can set the towers with the proper regulated, power.
So near a school where there might be, the answer to this, and it might be a silly question, but there's a lot of public concern about schools, right? So schools will want 5G tech, but is this something that comes into a Wi-Fi system and then it's broadcast in a school? And so, do you understand a little bit about
Yes.
technology? Maybe you can address the issue of
Yeah.
schools and children at high density with most likely Chromebooks or other, smart devices.
I'm certainly not a network architect, and I'm sure.
No, I'm not either.
There are other ways to do it, but from a high level, you wouldn't want to use 5G to pump the signal into everybody in the school. Because again, every time it has to go through a wall or a door or a desk, it's going to get, so what you want to do is you want to transmit the signal, say, to an antenna on the school, and then pump it through the school through a traditional Wi-Fi network, like we do currently with our own phones, right?
Okay.
You get the signal via cable or fiber optic. I don't have a fiber optic cable running to every room in my house. I have one, and then it goes wireless to my router. That's how I would do it at school. Okay, because we're more efficient. Most of the schools already have that infrastructure. So why rebuild all of that? The key will be that for a new school, for example, or an existing school that maybe hasn't upgraded, you don't need to run expensive ground wires or pole wires to the school. You can now transmit wirelessly to an antenna on the school and then pump it into the school that way.
That seems wise. So is this kind of like an all or none phenomenon in terms of rolling out 5G? Are there safety protocols in effect and standards that are well established in terms of keeping the public and pets and children and maybe even our crops, who knows, from experiencing any sorts of detrimental effects? And do you think we know enough about 5G to feel comfortable having this in our daily lives?
So I'll answer the last question. Because of the predictability and the existing studies that have been done with 3G and 4G, I would answer that as yes. I am comfortable with 5G rolling out. It is not an all or nothing. Like I said, you've got the three band groupings, the low, medium, and high. There are established, again, because of the predictability, FCC, FDA, international organizations have a range of safety measures in place. Again, based on the band, the frequency you're using, the power you're using, where you're putting it, what it's nearby, all of that goes into effect, and it's built on the existing regulation structure. And so there's again, I'm not certainly not an expert when it comes down to that level of detail. I couldn't quote the chapter and paragraph your FDA regulation, but they do have that infrastructure, that governance in place that any state, local, city, county grouping can refer to for that. And there's a wide range of independent consulting, private consulting, and others that can help with that information. When it comes to, it's funny to me when we think about all of this in context. In one of my other professional lives, I work with Ionizing site, and they have a program called Lights Out. And this is interesting because it's related to the electromagnetic spectrum. The most dangerous frequency, electromagnetic frequency, demonstrated by years of studies to birds in the United States is visible light. Not 5G, not 3G, not 4G. It's the visible light on buildings during migration season that can result in the deaths of thousands, hundreds of thousands of birds actually slamming into buildings in the middle of the night because they see the light and think it's a star or a set of stars, and they just, it throws off their navigation and slam into the building. So if you want to save birds, don't get rid of 5G, turn off the lights. So this is kind of the interesting conversation we have. We see 5G, it's this new technology, we hear all this information. But at the same time, the simple answer to saving birds is turn off the lights. You want to save bees, pollinators? Easy. Tear up your lawn and plant wildflowers. We're going to do that. Instead, we'll look at new technologies like 5G and understand them and the conclusions.
There's a lot of fear around new technology, right?
There's
I would love to remember the first test tube baby,
Oh, yeah.
in vitro fertilization. And, we were so concerned that we were going to be creating these monstrous children. And now, in vitro fertilization is a common everyday medical practice. But yeah, anytime there's a new technology, oftentimes our technology outpaces our cultural ability to absorb it and to process it and to deal with it without fear. So
I'm
in this modern age, we have so much information coming at us. Being skeptical is really smart, but it's also with this overwhelming amount of information, it's hard to know who to trust.
It is, and the internet it makes it more difficult because anyone can put anything up and there's no veracity, there's no validity. And I agree with you, Jeff. I'm a big believer in healthy skeptical science. I think that's more of advanced, At the same time, I'm sitting in this building. It's a 6-story concrete and steel building. I understand that there's forces acting on this building, wind and internal air pressure based on who's got the AC on. I don't know how it all works, but I know that there's been enough understanding, study, that we know how to build buildings, and we also know when to not build them and when to fix them, and I think the same thing applies here. We're looking at 5G technology. We understand the electromagnetic spectrum. We understand the physics behind it. And as the technology rolls out, it should be tested, it should be checked. We should go with more conservative approaches when we do installations. We shouldn't put one right smack dab in the middle of the playground blasting it up in all directions. At 2 feet high, that's probably not the best idea.
I think common sense is going to prevail, indeed. And as far as our commission goes, we don't have a lot of control over the technology. We just have control over the aesthetics and maybe, how far the minimum safe distance regulations perhaps, or like placement, those kinds of general rules are something that we would be able to consider. So is there anything else about 5G that you think would benefit my town council, planning commission to understand?
No, I just heard, sorry, what?
That we haven't yet covered.
I just wanted to touch really quickly on some of the benefits. We talked about that.
I would say that'd be great.
You know, obviously, the clearest benefit to the average American is going to be they get better speeds on their cell phones, which sounds simple. And we have to ask that question, risk versus reward. The other advantage that this technology has is, we talk about today, right? In our homes, we can get 1 gigabit internet connection. 5G can allow that wirelessly. So what does that mean? What that means is new construction, old construction that's getting updated, whether it's a school, a library, a park, a fire station. So these all don't need the physical wire running to them. They can have the 5G signal during a hurricane, which I know hits South Carolina every once in a while.
Yep.
The towers might go down, sure, but I can put them back up much faster than I can rerun a fiber optic cable, right? I can even put up temporary towers to restore emergency services and all of these other things, which would be much more difficult with this.
And solar power with that potentially, some of the new tech. So like after a hurricane, even if you don't have power, you can use the sun to fire up these 5Gs to get signals back out.
Exactly. And so you have emergency, so you have a lot of the existing things that will be made easier and better. But you also, you hinted at IoT, and I do like the joke about the smart coffee cup. But
The Internet of Things, yep.
so the exciting thing about this is, as a biologist and a biomedic, I get excited about this because when I look at a tree, I see the beauty of the tree, but I also see this brilliant thing that's full of millions of sensors, all processing data and all like doing crazy, even our own bodies. We're, each of skin can process, can pick up data and send signals to our brain and our brain back down. With the Internet of Things, using a 5G as its carrier, as its backbone, suddenly you can put sensors all over the place, tiny little sensors that are collecting all kinds of information. Our ability to predict storms, understanding flooding, understanding the movement of people and why they go places, where they go, and how to build better cities, and how getting internet, right? I think of the internet today as a public utility. I really do, and not from a legal perspective, but from a human perspective.
You know, everybody needs access.
Exactly. If I have 2 kids and a research report, and one has to go to the physical library, which maybe they can't get to because their parents are working, and this kid can just go online and get all the information they need. Who's at the advantage and disadvantage here? If I can suddenly blast a 5G signal that both kids can receive on their device, now we've opened up, all of human knowledge to kids. So there's a huge range of opportunity here and options.
And social equity options too. Yeah.
Yeah. Agriculture is already starting to use these sensors to better grow crops, targeting water, putting not just which field to water, but which chunk of the field to water, and which one to put which kind of fertilizers and pesticides. This is the kind of thing that starts to open up, and that's, I think, what is exciting as we move forward. Is I can't even think of all the great, the kids that are sitting in high school and college right now who are going to be growing up into this 5G network, and they're going to say, we need to do this, and it's going to be brilliant.
My coffee cup needs to be chipped,
My coffee.
not the way it's currently chipped.
Well, you and I grew up at a time like, I've fallen and can't get up, like the way, right? Now imagine something like that, but with, a Fitbit or something along that line that can detect all, heart rate, blood pressure, these kinds of things on grandma or grandpa, and predict ahead of time that something may not be right, send it through a 5G signal to the hospital, who can then contact grandma or grandpa, are you feeling okay? Do you want us to come out? Anything go wrong? And respond, all because the right data is collected. And of course, there's permissions in place and security is in place, but these are things that would be available that just can't really do that right now because of the data.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing time with me. And for this call for our upcoming August 2021 James Island Town Council Planning Commission meeting about 5G. We really appreciate your time, Chris. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Would it be okay if I give your contact information out to our planning commission, not to the joking public, but to our planning commission, if they have further questions for you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thanks so much. I'm going to stop the recording now.
I thought I'd include just a visual of what the electromagnetic spectrum was that they were speaking of, and two definitions from the CDC of non-ionizing and then ionizing radiation. And so some of the questions from June that you guys had, one was a speaker, and another one was, did the city of Folly Beach adopt a small cell ordinance? They did not adopt a small cell ordinance. They are considering small cells as co-located utilities, which were already regulated in their zoning regulations as requiring a special exception. And they would also be covered by their design review board that's in their commercial district. They have been able to negotiate location and placement with applicants, and they haven't actually had to utilize the special exception requirement just yet, since they were co-located in the public right of way. And another question was, what would happen if we received an application with no ordinance adopted? So if we receive an application, and we don't have an ordinance in place, then the default state provisions that are currently in the South Carolina Code of Laws would apply. And we lose the option of the design manual for aesthetics and with respect to applications filed beforehand. Another question was, is there a deadline or a timeline for adopting a small cell ordinance? There is no deadline, but as I just stated before, any compliant provisions such as aesthetic, design, concealment, and stealth would be applicable to any applications if we don't have an ordinance in the design manual. Who would be responsible for processing of applications? Ultimately, applications would come to the planning staff, but if we adopt the model ordinance and the language is continued, we will have the right to engage one or more consultants per state law, which they spell out an amount that we are allowed to charge for looking at applications per small cell. And then, has any other municipality adopted specific health-related rules? I sent that question to the Municipal Association, and they are not aware of any South Carolina municipalities that has adopted rules like that. The staff recommendation would be to adopt a model ordinance, since most of the provisions of the model ordinance are required by state law, and to create a design manual with additional specifications that would fit our wishes within the compliant provisions that are also defined in state law. So it would address aesthetic, design, concealment, stealth requirements that are technically feasible and technologically neutral, they're reasonable, and they're published within 30 days prior to becoming applicable with regard to any wireless provider, and not an effective prohibition of service that is prohibited by federal law. And I just thought that maybe we could take any input from the meeting tonight, create the ordinance off the model ordinance and the design manual, and come back to planning commission at some point with a draft ordinance with a recommendation to council.
Is that all, Kristen?
Yes,
We've got Bill Bo Wilson, who is a town attorney. So if we have any questions for him, we probably need to go into executive session to get your opinion back.
If there's a specific legal question, if you'll state the nature of the question, that is the grounds for needing it, and then take a vote on executive session. If the vote passes, that would be appropriate.
Do y'all have any legal questions?
No.
Not legal, that's about it.
Okay, good. Okay, well, I guess we will probably want to direct the questions to Kristen.
I'll try my best.
Do you have?
Oh, yeah, I just want to know, does the town actually own any of the cell towers or locations, or would they be mounted on telephone poles or, you know?
We don't own any existing cell towers, but we do own the, any light poles that are controlled by the union in the right of way on Poly Road.
And is that what they would use then to?
It depends on, you know, how the ordinance is written. I
Okay.
suppose if, you know, we could write in the design manual to locate them on existing light poles. When feasible, I think is the words that state law keeps repeating.
Would they be giving us an overall plan on where everything is located, or just do it a one-off deal where they come, have an application for, I want these 15 poles, or how would that work?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but I think that they would ask for a, I forgot what the word is, but like a kind of a survey of what's available.
Okay,
And then we would have a certain amount of time to get back with them. And I'm assuming there'd be different companies with different applications, so it wouldn't just be one, you know, the same group. Well, we haven't gotten an application yet, so I'm not exactly sure.
gotcha. So there's no way to see like an overall plan or how it would roll out and what neighborhoods and that kind of stuff?
No, I think it would just be.
A one-off deal.
Yeah. Mhm.
David, do you have some questions?
With the design, you know, the only one that I've seen that's been approved is the one on 2 Broad Street, which is right there, to see between Broad and the East Bay. And, it's right next to Wells Fargo. It's like inside. And, it says about that, it's very much like the light that we have. And it's a first bronze, black type of thing, and it really blends in, you wouldn't even notice it. And, I think something, the design is not obtrusive, and, didn't have advertisements, didn't have, political things, anything like that, something very plain like that. And the thing I'm noticing on all these poles is they have a egg-shaped piece of metal that says, most of these are Dominion like this. Downtown is SC&G, and the one on 2 Broad has the company who does the small company in Pennsylvania. And I call them, and so people will know that's what that is. And I think a simple design with color like that, and even if you do mount it on a telephone pole, I think it should be the same color as I'm talking about like that. You look it up, we've got so many wires and stuff. You look around, I'm looking at the poles a lot more as a guy, and I'm so slow that I can very easily read it, because I'm not going to get past it very quickly. But it's a nice color, and the ones that are not they don't take the time to get a higher grade, are all rusted out, and they just look sort of trashy, actually. They've got rust around the ends of the barrels and things like that. So they do it, we should have some continuity, make it simple, so that when each time we're moving, we don't have to go through rules. This is what we want to do. If you want to hold, you're going to have to be full. Is that right? They would have to be full, so it should hold actually. But that's just my thought on the design.
Would that be attached to the existing poles?
The way this looks, it's about like this, and it's got a meter, an electric meter here, and then up maybe 15 feet up. It almost looks like a cage, like this, and maybe 3 yards, it looks like a cage. It's up about 20 feet. It's very unobtrusive. It fits in very much with the light pole. And well, further down, just past Two Broad, you go past the Catholic Church, and right along there, there's another one that it's coming to put in, and it is an old, it's made out of aluminum, and it's rusted out, and it's on telephone pole, and aesthetically, it's doesn't look that good. That's the only, and I've been looking for them, because the patents, and I have to know.
So what you're talking about really have something there for maintenance purposes. So once you put it up, it looks nice and fades, it looks. Maybe when you come back, fix it, bring it back up. Mark asked about who probably cover. Well, I'm thinking they're gonna probably put them financially, they better put them out there where they get some returns off of them sometime. So I'm thinking more or less in a business area, where there's a lot of business. You said Broad Street, no part of it, can't be more business.
Well, it's a tourist, people come down and stay, they go up Broad, they go down Broad, they stay, there's a lot of tourists there. So that the old building is right there, historic building is right there, that's a lot of people visit, a lot of traffic.
The bottom question is, why did it want to put a, why did it want to put on? Why? I mean, it costs.
We haven't yet.
If they put them on Broad Street, what benefit do they get? The benefit is usually that.
Any other questions? Then?
The thing of it is, you know, that's what that is. There was a concern in one of the letters that we got, people would know that's what it was. And that label there, we give the citizens that they would know.
We can see that we have a map of where they are. And
They had a serial number on them, and whoever put it in there.
that's exactly. Yeah, I agree. I don't think we ought to have any kind of letter or anything other than disappointment, antenna or whatever. I know that right now we do not have a historical district in the town, but the is it possible that Fort Johnson could eventually be designated as a historical district? We need to have.
Yeah, I mean, that, it would take some time to get that done. It would be 24,000.
Well, Fort Johnson itself.
Oh, back there, yeah,
That is part of the town.
right, and this would only be, applicable to, in the right of way. In the public right of way.
So that's all private.
Well, yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I'll have to look into that, but, I don't see any applications coming in for a residential area or anything like that, just because of the way it's used. But in the model ordinance, if get an application in a residential area for a public right of way, state that you can, the municipality has the right to, suggest a different location within 150 feet of that application.
Is it likely that they'll want to put them near schools?
I don't, like I said, it would have to be in the public right of way. And I think that's what this ordinance is regulating. So, this is on the road in front of the school.
I just want to say the school. So, if I'm understanding correctly, we can't limit that. Am I wrong? For health reasons.
I don't believe.
There are set distances that has to be from a building or a structure.
No, it would need, it can't, each new pole. And there's some wording in here about, co-locating, if there's something near there, then they have to try to co-locate it on the existing pole, and if not, the new pole can't be within a certain amount of feet from another pole. I didn't see a lot of things related to distance in the ordinance.
If you go to that, it's a lot of stuff, and it's a lot of technical stuff. And that's why I consulted, maybe very helpful.
Right, I agree.
To that specific, especially when we write the ordinance,
Mhm.
to put that in the ordinance, because someone that does this for a living, who's a professional with this.
My question, is it a model that you looked at? Doesn't it answer the question you asked?
It's the one that the municipal association put out, so they based it on what state law requires. It's basically the minimum requirements with some added aesthetics meant to put in place in case municipalities didn't adopt a design anymore. They could adopt the municipal model ordinance and still have a few stealth requirements in there. But,
I guess what I'm thinking is, well, that's y'all.
yeah,
So if you go with that ordinance, at least you got some processes and things that other people have considered. So, should we go more or less toward that ordinance, or we don't want to really rewrite one ourselves? What I'm thinking, but maybe even what we.
Well, the staff recommendation was to adopt the model ordinance and add the design manual where we can add those things that color, full top canisters, things like that. Because without that, if we get an application, then they would have the right to, not go by those standards.
I have one other question, maybe a little question. Can we, I noticed in some of the literature we got from the public, that they suggested that we restrict the 5G in neighborhoods for reasons of aesthetics. And, can you think that's possible?
I'm not sure what that is.
Just have aesthetics and value, and property value.
So your suggestion is that you put something together and we'll discuss it at the next meeting. Any other questions?
No, sounds good to me.
The approval process is really compelling, and they have control, some control. Some control.
Are you going to have somebody who's an expert?
You don't trust me to describe.
I trust you more.
Yeah, I think we talked about possibly using one of our on-call consultants to help us, make sure everything is in order.
So should you do that before we meet next time, or?
I think it would be best to take a stab at it first. Since we have a few that we can go by. Do you have any recommendations on the Boston one or the Greenville one, any language in there that you think would fit the town? Let us know.
I noticed that the city of Charleston has some restrictions included there. In other words, they didn't allow the units less than 300 feet apart. I'm assuming there's some reason behind that, but that might be something, and then a height limit might be something that we would want to include.
There is a height, already in the municipal ordinance. I think it says 40 feet. Yes. 50. So, is that or state law, maybe I'll have to look about state law and see if it's.
I saw that consistent with the.
City had 5 feet above existing pole, never exceeded 40 feet. I would think we need to have a repair damage clause in there. And then the fees to the town would be pretty standard.
Okay, so
a removal kind of clause.
That's
So if they abandon it.
That's a good thought, yeah.
Too many of them, like, a lot of these different, cable TV companies now, they leave their lines hanging up there forever. Fashion.
Anything else we can talk about?
We have one quick.
Okay.
What happened to town of James Island comprehensive plan? You did get council say good, so we good on
Well, anything else?
And here on page 17, it's got the abandonment clause, and it has a penalty to it. So it's all, you know,
it. So it's in that,
page 17, see at the bottom. You know,
There's a requirement for insurance too.
Yeah, I think that's, and, like, and there's a couple other things like the city has the ID marker, the provider data number, whole pot canister, maybe a certain color to match, things like that. Cabling and shrouding should be concealed and neat. So,
And that is the verbiage in one of the councils. Utility poles and encased in a shroud of earth tone colors that would minimize visible impact, something like that.
that's the
I don't know, do we need to put something in that no other equipment should be placed on hold without prior staff approval? Once we approve the mission.
And it also states that in your design manual, you can include, you can include pictures of, acceptable
Oh, let's
design or. Mm.
I got a question. Do we have any big things coming up in the future that you can see that we might be thinking of?
We do have a rezoning application that we need to see. We will be in front of you guys next month.
For maybe next. Well, I guess if we follow anything else, we could forward the email to you.
Please do.
Anything else there?
I think this covers. I think it's all good. I think it be amended retroactively. In other words, if we see the need, we get it amended, that's some of the things that we should.
Right.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, I did want to say that I thought Deb did a great job giving us a speaker that knew something about the subject. And I appreciate Ms. Beard and the other ladies, all the information you sent us, you made us think and really look into this. Thank you very much. Any comments from the other commissioners? Our next planning meeting will be scheduled for September 9th. It sounds like we'll have a couple of issues on the plate. If you come up with anything that you want Kristen to consider, please email. If there's nothing else, then I'll listen to you.